The Michelangelo drawing discussed in this episode was featured in the exhibition Michelangelo, Mind of the Master, on view at the Getty Center, February 25th through June 7th, 2020. We are grateful for the tremendous generosity of our sponsors who contributed to the J. Paul Getty Museum's presentation. The exhibition in Los Angeles was made possible with major funding from Joe Carroll and Ronald S. Lauder. It was supported by an anonymous gift in memory of Melvin R. Seaton and sponsored by our generous partners at City National Bank. Hello, I'm Jim Cuno, president of the J. Paul Getty Trust. Welcome to Art and Ideas, a podcast in which I speak to artists, conservators, authors, and scholars about their work.
I open the book and I start going through, and sort of over halfway through, I come across this drawing of the mourning woman, and I look at it, and I said, this is by Michelangelo.
In this episode, I speak with Julien Stock, an expert in old master drawings, about his astonishing discovery of a previously unknown Michelangelo drawing. This drawing was featured in a recent exhibition of the Getty Museum's new acquisitions, before being shown in Michelangelo, Divine Draftsman and Designer, a monumental exhibition at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. Until recently, Julien Stock was head of old master drawings at Sotheby's, London. In the late 1990s, while doing research in the library of the early 18th century country house Castle Howard, he came across a drawing of a standing woman in a state of mourning. The name of the drawing's maker was not indicated, but the drawing bore the collector's mark of the distinguished 18th century artist and connoisseur, Jonathan Richardson. That gave Stock pause, for Richardson was one of the greatest connoisseurs of his day. Intrigued by this fact, and by the evident quality of the drawing itself, Stock began his research and ultimately concluded that the drawing was one of a small group of large-scale figure studies made by Michelangelo early in his career, likely between 1500 and 1505. This conclusion caused an international sensation. For excluding the Michelangelo drawings in England's royal collection, only 4 important drawings by the Renaissance master were still in private hands. Happily, the Castle Howard drawing is now accessible to the public as part of the collection of the Getty Museum. I recently sat down with Julien Stock to learn more about this drawing and the circumstances of its discovery. Well, Julien, thank you so much for your time this morning on the podcast and for your coming to the Getty to lecture us on this Michelangelo drawing, which until you discovered it was an unknown drawing, as I understand it. Could you describe the drawing for us and describe also how you found it and how you came to recognize it as a Michelangelo drawing?
Yes, I was working at Sotheby's, and Sotheby's regularly every 5 years did a revaluation of the Castle Howard, contents of Castle Howard, Vanbrugh, 18th century. And I was up there revaluing all the paintings. This was a 3-day job. And on the last day, my colleague, James Miller, had finished. So he thought he'd pop into the library and spend some time in the library because he'd got nothing to do. He'd finished looking at his pictures. I was still working away looking at old master pictures because Castle Howard has a lot. And he pulls this large volume out because there's nothing written on the spine. Now, why do you think James Miller pulled it out of the spine? Well, in almost every English country house, you would have large books with nothing written on the spine because usually there was something naughty and Japanese in it, if you get my meaning. So anyway, he pulls it out and there are all the drawings. So he comes up to me in one of the other rooms and says, "Oh, Julien, I've been in the library. I pulled out this scrapbook and it's full of old master drawings." And I sort of swear at myself and say, damn. And say, okay, I'll revalue. Was
Castle Howard famous for its drawings as well as its paintings?
Not at all. No, it doesn't really have any drawings.
So it was a surprise in itself that there was an album of drawings.
We didn't know. And this, after all, as I've just said, this is a revaluation, but not once, a revaluation 3 times. So 3 times it was missed. You would have thought the book department, because the books would have been done, would have pulled it out and seen that there were drawings pasted into it, or drawings on mounts. So I sort of curse and say, OK, I'll go and have a look at it. And I open the book and I start going through. And sort of over halfway through, I come across this drawing of the mourning woman, very Gothic in the 13th, 14th century type of drapery, very classical. And I look at it, and I won't tell you exactly what I said, but anyway, it was pretty. I was very excited, and I said, "This is by Michelangelo."
Not because you knew that it existed, but because you knew by the look of it that it had to be. I mean,
exactly.
This was an unknown drawing until you discovered it.
Yes. Yeah. So it's just the way it was drawn made me immediately think of Michelangelo.
Yeah. I know the drawing's been described as the most important Michelangelo to be discovered in living memory. What makes the drawing so important?
Well, I'm not sure about living memory, but I would say, well, it's an early work. So in a way, it's a teenage Michelangelo. So he's probably 18 or 19, at the most 20, 21. So it's that young. And there are only 5 drawings of this type that exists. And for example, Italy, the whole of Italy has no drawing like this. There's one in the Albertina, which is double-sided. There's one in the Louvre. There's one in the British Museum that I knew very well because when I joined Sotheby's all those years ago in 1964, every morning, it was such a civilized company then, as it was privately owned, every morning I was told, you go to the British Museum and you look at drawings. We have employed you to become a drawing expert. And by jingo, that is what you're going to do. So every morning I went to the BM and I knew the British Museum Michelangelo drawing.
Oh, yeah. So when you saw it as in relationship to those particular drawings, or did you just say the same kind of ink, the same kind of paper, the same kind of pen, I suppose, because it's a pen and ink.
Same kind of pen, same kind of hatching and cross-hatching. But of course, my colleagues who were there said, "Oh, come off it.
Right.
Don't be ridiculous.
Impossible to find a new
Michelangelo drawing in it. Go home." So, but of course, that's when my work began, because then I had to think very carefully, how can I get everybody to agree with me that it's by Michelangelo?
Well, before we get to that, could you describe the drawing to us,
yes,
what it looks like?
It's a profile of a mourning woman. She's got a shawl over her head, and she's obviously sad. She's in profile, in very classical drapery, very Gothic drapery that you get in artists like Giotto and Masaccio, that Michelangelo was very occupied with at that time. He admired, understandably, Giotto and Masaccio and other early 13th and 14th century artists. So he made lots of copies of them as a young man, as a 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old young man. That's what he copied.
And not sculpture,
No, not
paintings.
Sculpture, yes, because some people find this very sculptural. I don't find it personally very sculptural.
But clearly when he was looking at these other artists to draw after them, he was interested in the volume of the figures they were painted. So there's something sculptural about the paintings, in effect.
Yes, yeah. And this very heavy, this very stoic, there's no movement in this drawing. This is a figure which is standing, very solid. That's where also it's very Michelangelesque, because she, and I'm sure it is a woman, is a very powerful woman with large arms, and she's rather like Sebastiano del Piombo's women as well, who was a friend of Michelangelo. When you look at Sebastiano del Piombo's faces and some of Michelangelo's as well, they're very male. They're not pretty females.
Right. So you look at this drawing and you know that there are 4 or 5 others that might have some relationship to it.
Right.
Do you take pictures of the drawing with you to then compare with the other drawings? And then what is the process by which you plot out how you're going to convince other people that it is in fact by Michelangelo?
Exactly. Well, that took quite a long time because, one, I knew that the British Museum drawing, which is of a philosopher, we think it's a philosopher, we're not sure, but it's definitely a man. made me think immediately of this drawing. I put two and two together. I was allowed by Castle Howard to take the drawing from Castle Howard to Sotheby's in London. And we took it out of the book because it was still on the same mount when I took it out of the book, and photographed the whole book, all the drawings in the book. And then I started work on it when I had time, because I said to Castle Howard, I can't do this in, this isn't a 2-day job. This is maybe a 5 or 10 year job, because I've got to show it to people. So I went to the British Museum, of course, and showed it to the British Museum, and they were positive, but not 100% certain. There's always a certain amount of jealousy, I guess, but also reluctance to accept something by a major artist. Are you really sure? Could it be by Baccio Bandinelli, for instance, who can be confused? And on the back of the mount of this drawing, there are shelf marks when it was in somebody called Jonathan Richardson's collection, and he has BB, which, of course, some people would say, Baccio Bandinelli, it must be. Right. So one has to be ready for the negatives when people throw them up at you. For example, also this drawing has white heightening, rather like your, well, I suppose nobody uses it now, Tipex, when your secretary was typing and there was a mistake and you would Tipex over with white and then draw over. So they would say, but that white is added later. Well, in now, let's call it the Getty drawing, the white is not added later. It's absolutely by Michelangelo, because there's underdrawing line in brown ink, and also over the white there is brown ink, which is absolutely consistent. Her left arm and elbow, Michelangelo has obviously been dissatisfied with his original pen and ink part of that drawing. So he's covered it with white so that he can draw over it to get the form that he wants. So the white heightening here in this drawing is a correction.
So you photographed all the drawings in the book itself,
yes,
and you knew of 4 or 5 others that might be comparable to this drawing that would help you convince someone that this drawing is indeed by Michelangelo. Was there a provenance that was helpful to you? We know that you mentioned Richardson. Richardson owned it at one time.
Well, Richardson owned it one time. So, of course, I looked up the Richardson sale catalogue. But, of course, there you would just have, a group of 10 drawings, or 2 drawings, one by Michelangelo, for instance, and one by Salvator Rosa, sold together. Or, 3 Michelangelo and 2 Agostino Carrara. It was just a big jumble. And I thought, as the Richardson mount is cut, because normally it would be 22 inches by 16 as the standard mount size that everybody used in the 18th century, 19th century, 20th century. We still use it in Britain. 22/16 is the size. And this mount had been cut. So often Richardson would write on the back of the mount. He would give a description or say what he thought it was. And there's nothing on the back of this. And so I thought, now, that's in a way strange, but, did Richardson actually know that he owned a Michelangelo? I'm not so sure.
Yeah, for our podcast listeners, tell us about Richardson briefly. I mean, he's an 18th century collector.
Yeah, he's an 18th century portrait painter, English, and he had a enormous collection of drawings. And they were all sold in the 1760s. And everybody at that time, English aristocrats, were actually interested in old master drawings and old master prints and old master pictures. So they were buying. So Howard, Henry Howard, purchased this drawing, I think, in the sale. Although we know that Howard bought it because in the Victoria and Albert Museum, there's a marked catalogue, semi-marked catalogue, where a Howard was buying in that sale. So one assumes that it must have been the same Howard.
So it's been in the same collection that is at Castle Howard for 225 years or something?
Yes, something like that, yes.
And not remarked upon in any one of those 225 years?
And also, on the back of the mount, I noticed. These things don't always come immediately. Sometimes you're doing something else and you realise the penny drops somewhere, and you scoot left instead of carrying on straight, on going right. But on the back of the mount, there are acid stains. Now, the acid stains meant that it was definitely framed, because when people framed things in the 19th century, orange boxes were usually used because they were the cheapest form of wood, because it was just a backboard holding the drawing and the glass in the frame. And the resins in that wood that was used for the orange box would eventually, after time, go into the mount but protect the drawing, which was so good because they were using this mount is on a pure rag, not on a paper, on a non-rag card. So I thought, now it's been framed at one time. Now don't tell me they didn't realise that it was by Michelangelo. So I spent then 3 or 4 days going in the dungeons of Castle Howard, going through all the archives, trying to find any mention of Michelangelo. Couldn't find anything. So I found absolutely nothing about it. So we know that it was framed. We know that somebody must have looked at it. It's still in wonderful condition. I mean, it's probably one of these 6 early drawings which is in the best condition.
Yeah. So when you looked around at the 6 other drawings, and they're all in museums, not one in private hands, so they all have a keeper in charge, a curator and a conservator who's worked with them. So they have some considerable knowledge about those drawings.
Exactly.
Did they, other than the British Museum, which you've described to us, had some skepticism about the drawing? How did the others respond to the drawings?
Well, I didn't really want to show it to many people because I wanted to publish this, because I thought I'm never going to make another Michelangelo discovery, so I better keep quiet. So I would go with a photograph, a very good photograph of it, and go to the Albertina and pull out that drawing, go to the Louvre and pull out that drawing, go to Munich and pull out that drawing, and just show them the photograph. Obviously, I couldn't take the drawing because not that it was at that time authenticated. So there was still a question mark on it. It could still have turned out with everybody saying, no, we don't think you're right, and it's just a copy, or in our opinion, it's not good enough. In which case, it goes back to Castle Howard and is just left in the book until the next person comes along. So I was very careful with who I showed it to. And also, there's a very good corpus by a Michelangelo scholar called Tolnai, who did 4 volumes of facsimile, wonderful facsimiles, a little bit red in the reproduction, but wonderful. So you could put it next to there and compare and be sure, because I wanted to look at it many, many times in different moods, because one day you're in a good mood and you think one thing, and when you're in a bad mood, you have another. Your eyes or your mood changes your feeling towards a work of art.
So, and among these people to whom you showed the drawing, were there some academic-based
Yes,
scholars?
I showed it to John Gear, obviously, who was then at the British Museum, and Philip Pouncey, both Michelangelo. Michael Hirst saw it, who was probably the most brilliant person, who's sadly just passed away. And Conrad, of course, saw it because
what did he say?
He thought absolutely.
Yeah. So you're getting opinions from others who either question or confirm
exactly.
your guess that it's Michelangelo, and then you want to publish it? Is that the next step in the process?
Then I still hadn't really finished everything, because I thought, and I still think, that this is, as the other drawings, they're all after Giotto or Masaccio. There's one double-sided drawing, so I'm talking about 4 and 1 in Chantilly, 5 drawings. And this is really the 6th. And these all have this incredible monumentality of drapery. They're all, if you look at the Giotto frescoes and Masaccio frescoes, it fits perfectly. There can be no question that that's what he's been seeing. Now, if Michelangelo, as a young man, and we know that he never stopped drawing, but we also know that he destroyed hundreds, if not thousands, of his drawings, burnt them even. So we have 6 drawings after 6 figures in these of these frescoes, but where are all the others? So it's quite possible that this is for something, it is a copy after something, not necessarily the works by Giotto, Masaccio and other artists of that period, 13th, 14th century, but other people, because he went to Siena, he went to Prato, he travelled all over the place.
Normally, but to help you in this process, you would have found a particular source for it, and you could say, this drawing is after this particular painting, or you'd find a painting by Michelangelo or a sculpture by Michelangelo for which the drawing would be a study, but you found neither of those.
I didn't. And in fact, Paul Joanides, who's a very eminent professor of Michelangelo as well as Raphael, Cambridge University, was a friend, and he came to stay in a flat that I had rented when I was living in Florence. And I had a photograph of the drawing, and he looked at the photograph and he said, this is fantastic. This is Michelangelo. I said, yes, it is. But he said, he was very excited. So he said, could I have an image of it? I said, Paul, you're not allowed to reproduce it. So I gave him an image of it, and I put a cross through it. I said, you're absolutely not allowed to publish it. And not long afterwards, Paul discovered in the Louvre a 16th century drawing after this drawing. And as you know, it's cut along the bottom. And it's exactly the same. So this is a drawing that we disagree on the attribution, but it's got to be a drawing of around about 1530, this other copy, this
copy
Reggio
of the Michelangelo drawing.
Of this very drawing.
So here's cut. So here's the drawing that by the later in the 16th century, or was it 17th?
Much later, yes. Because this is 1490.
Someone is drawing after it.
Yeah, I think this could be, 1485, 86. If everybody accepts the Getty Museum Torment of St. Anthony painting, which supposedly Michelangelo painted when he was in Ghirlandai's studio at the age of 12, which is a pretty good picture. But, I mean, how you can be certain whether it is really the Michelangelo that is recorded, because apparently there was another version of that painting known at one time. But if it is, it means that we have about 2 to 3 years of no work by Michelangelo. We don't have anything by him, because everybody's saying that this drawing, the earliest this drawing gets given is usually, in the 90s. So if this picture is accepted, then there's a lot of time there. There are a few years. And Michelangelo, we know, he never stopped drawing. He never stopped looking. He travelled everywhere. Yeah. For example, he goes from Florence to Bologna, works in Bologna. We know that. Then he goes from Bologna to Venice, where we have nothing of his Venetian sojourn. We don't know what he did or anything. But Padua is on the way. So there's no way he wouldn't have stopped at Padua.
Well, since we don't know this drawing is related to a particular painting or sculpture, what would be the purpose of the drawing? And tell us about the process by which Michelangelo undertook drawings in his youthful period.
Well, in a way, the copying at that time and later in the 16th, 17th and 18th century, copying works by earlier masters than the antique was part of your education. So you did it because of your passion and your love and excitement of looking at paintings by Giotto and looking at Donatello, looking at everything around you and taking notes. There were no cameras then. There were no, after all, were there? So people drew. So that's why I think he made copies of all these figures in the frescoes, because he wanted to absorb them.
Did he carry with him sheets of paper and pen and ink?
I think he did.
And then how did if he's traveling so far, how does he then make the drawing, and what does he keep it in, and how does he bring it back to Florence?
Well, that's a good question. Michelangelo, when he was in Florence, of course, would just go to the chapel and make a copy and sit there, I guess, and make the copy.
How many drawings by Michelangelo do we know?
That's sort of maybe sort of 400 or so, I think, 490.
Yeah. So that's clearly a fraction of the great many number he made.
Absolute, yes. He destroyed thousands of drawings.
Yeah. Was he consistent in the materials he used, particular period? In other words, if you looked at this drawing, you'd say that's an early drawing because only in the early drawings did he use this particular kind of materials.
Yeah, not necessarily the material, but the way he drew. This drawing, similar to other drawings of this early period by Michelangelo, have very, very refined, fine cross-hatching in two coloured inks, brown inks. One is lighter than the other one, and they're very precise. You could almost say that they are like a computer drawing. So that hatching that we call it, which is lines going from right to left, and then lines going from left to right, and lines going, horizontally or diagonally, is the way that this is drawn. Then he became freer. He became more serpentine, and the figures were moving by 1503, 1505. At 21, for example, when he was 21, he goes to Rome with a letter of introduction to Cardinal Riario. And now, when an artist like Michelangelo, who was looking for work, looking for commissions, he would certainly have taken some drawings with him. And that's why I think this drawing, and the one that I compare it with, the British Museum drawing of the standing philosopher or academic or doctor, I think he took both of them to Rome. One, because there's in the Farnese Hours, that beautiful small book done for Cardinal Farnese by Giulio Clovio of 1530s, that sort of date. You have, and this figure in reverse, where Giulio Clovio is copying this, he must be copying almost certainly this image.
If it's in reverse, would it have been traced as opposed to drawn?
No, I think
Why would you draw it in reverse, do you think?
Well, because this figure, when I first saw it, I thought it must be for a Christ on the cross. But it's not for a Christ on the cross, because you normally have Christ on the cross, you have on the right St. John the Baptist, and on the left you have the Virgin. Well, you couldn't possibly have this on the left. And I checked again, I went through hundreds and hundreds of images of Christ on the cross, because I wanted to be absolutely certain that I wasn't making a fool of myself. It's very easy to make a fool of myself. And what's fascinating about the British Museum drawing is that on the back of the British Museum drawing, because paper then was considered an expensive commodity, and you took great care, you used every square inch. And on the back of the British Museum drawing, there is a black chalk head for the Sistine ceiling. So that means that drawing must have been part of the portfolio that Michelangelo took when he was 21 to Rome to show people, this is how good I am. Mm-hmm. I'll show you, I'll carve you a figure. And give me a piece of marble and I'll do something in the next sort of couple of weeks and you'll be shocked.
Yeah. Were his drawings valued in his lifetime by collectors?
Yes, very much so.
So they're very early collections of his
drawings?
Yes,
well,
of distinction?
Pietro Aretino, that blackguard, would write to him and say, if you don't send me a drawing, I'm going to say horrible things about you and say that you're a rotten, yes, a little bit of blackmail.
Aretino actually wrote a life of Michelangelo, we think.
No, Aretino didn't, but the people that did Condivi and Vasari, of course, writes a lot about him.
So he had some threatening power over an artist who wanted to be recognized.
Exactly,
and valued by all.
But Michelangelo was very protective of his work. After all, we mustn't forget that naughty Raphael, nobody really criticizes Raphael for it. But Raphael bribed his way into the Sistine ceiling because Michelangelo had given the strictest instructions. No one is to see my unfinished frescoes in the Sistine ceiling. They should just they're not allowed in. Raphael gets in. He bribes him. Well, that's a bit naughty, isn't it?
Was there any time when Michelangelo's drawings weren't collected or they weren't valued as the intimate markings of a genius?
No, I think they were. They would always have been collected. They would always been wanted.
And valued.
highly
by
yes,
others.
yes.
And he let them go, or what? How did they get out of his studio?
Well, some of them were stolen. There are drawings that were stolen from him. And some of them, like now the Getty drawing, I think he probably gave to somebody like, say, the banker. There was a banker called Galli. And Galli commissioned him to do things. And it would be quite understandable for Galli, who had a collection, a wonderful antique sculpture. He would have had other things. And he would have had probably drawings. And he invited artists like Giulio Clovio. This is my fantasy, by the way. Giulio Clovio, they would have been in discussion. So people would have seen this drawing. Other artists like Salviati must have seen this drawing in somebody like Galli's collection. And then they would have said, this is by Michelangelo and it's fantastic. And, let's make a copy of it.
Is it likely, now getting back to the provenance of the drawing, is it likely that it would have gotten to Richardson without others knowing it? There wouldn't be textual evidence of someone remarking upon the
I suppose it is, although I find it, I find it very hard to believe. That's why it's so strange that here I am, Castle Howard, doing a revaluation, opening a book, finding this drawing pasted into the scrapbook with nothing, no sign of Michelangelo on it at all.
And so I'm going to get back then to the how you get confirmation this is by Michelangelo. So you've shown it now. We've talked about the finding of it in the Castle Howard. We've talked about the role of drawing in the work of Michelangelo. We've talked about the people then with whom you've shown the drawing, that there are 4 or 5 others that might be similarly of the same period and therefore related in time, if nothing else, to this drawing. How did you get it published, and in what form was it published?
Well, actually, there was an amusing story. I used to be chairman of the paper conservators, and I'd given it up, but they kept sending me their, what's going on. And I had it at home at one time when I was writing my short article on it. And I had it in rather like here in the sunlight was shining over my shoulder and it was shining on the drawing. And I saw there was pulp in the paper, in this drawing's paper. And I thought, hey, when you have pulp in the paper, it usually means that it's blue paper, and blue paper is Venetian. And as far as I remember, I'm thinking, I was thinking sort of immediately, I've seen these, rather like the bits, in your freshly pressed orange, those bits that, children don't like, but we like. And they're in the paper. And I thought, oh God, this could be on blue paper. And as far as I know, Michelangelo there's no drawing on blue paper. Negative. Somebody will say, but it's on blue paper. It can't possibly be by Michelangelo.
And we should, for the podcast listeners, point out that there's no evident blue tint to the color of the paper now.
Of the now, no. Well, there is actually under certain light, but it fades, of course.
Very quickly,
the paper can fade, yes.
Yeah.
So when this paper conference came, I said to Castle Howard, I've got to take the drawing over to the paper conference, and I'll join a group where we're looking at blue paper. So there was, in fact, a group of scholars, paper conservators working on blue paper. So I take it to Toronto, show it to, everybody examines it and think about it. I say, I think this is Michelangelo, but it's on blue paper. And as far as I know, Michelangelo never used blue paper. Can you confirm or deny that is it or isn't it? They couldn't find out. So I'd come back to London with nothing. So then...
Sorry, so you weren't able to confirm that it was blue paper?
No. But then what Peter Bauer, who is a paper historian, said, bring it to the Victoria and Albert Museum Conservation Department and we'll look at it again there and we'll just lift a corner of the drawing to see. And hey presto, this drawing is laid down on a piece of blue paper. So it's not on blue paper, it's laid down on blue paper. So again, the doubting Thomases, it's on blue paper. It's not by Michelangelo. Hold on a moment, it's not. So I was ready to shoot them down.
Yeah, I thought you were going to say that when they lifted up the corner of the paper, you would have found that the underside of the paper, the side of the paper that wasn't exposed to light, was blue.
No, it's actually laid, the drawing is on oatmeal paper as it is now, and it's underneath is blue.
Uh-huh. So you're trying to prove a negative here. You've proven that it wasn't on blue paper, so that's good.
So that's good. So
what's the next
step?
So
then I was free. Then I thought, I think I've done all my homework properly. I don't think anybody can shoot me down. So I wanted to publish it with a very good reproduction. And there used to be this marvellous magazine produced in Italy called FMR, Franco Maria Ricci, and he does wonderful reproductions. And I thought, I'm not going to go to the Burlington or Master Drawings because, they just won't give me. I want the very best reproduction so that when people judge it, they're going to judge it correctly. So we went to a lot of trouble, and they did a marvellous job. And Hey Presto was published, and I even there's one German scholar called Alexander Perig, and Professor Perig is very negative about a lot of drawings by Michelangelo, saying they're by Benvenuto Cellini and other artists. And he wrote me a letter saying, what a wonderful early drawing, and congratulations, it's a great discovery. So even the doubting Thomas, Perig himself, said yes.
Yeah. So there was general acclaim, maybe some outliers, but general acclaim about the drawing. How quickly from that moment of published evidence that this was a Michelangelo drawing to the sale of the drawing, how much time took place?
It was too short a time, in my opinion, because when something new like this is discovered, there are always people that are a little hesitant about. They want to hold back. They like something that has got a long provenance, and are we really certain? Is anybody going to change their mind? And unfortunately, at that time, Simon Howard, who was in charge of the house, was getting a divorce from his wife. And, well, you know the story afterwards. So this was one of the items that had to be put on the market. So I was very sad, in fact, that it had to be sold. So, but anyway,
was that a year
sold.
Later from
that was about,
from publication?
About 1 or 2 years afterwards. Yes.
And was there obviously great interest in the drawing because it was proven to be Michelangelo drawing? And we know that the British government can put a stop on the export of a drawing as important as this. Why was there not? Was there a stop put on it?
No, they didn't put a stop on it, partly because the British Museum do have
so many.
Well, one, there are so many Michelangelo drawings in Britain, so we mustn't be too greedy. And two, we have that one very fine drawing, which I compare the Getty drawing to now, with the two go hand in hand. In fact, I would have liked this drawing to have been bought by the Italian government and given to Casa Buonarroti or the Uffizi, because Italy doesn't have a drawing of this type.
Of an early drawing like this?
No, they don't have an early drawing.
So where was it sold?
It was sold at Sotheby's in London, and it went very well. And
was there great excitement about it?
Yeah, there was, yes.
Yeah. In the room itself?
In the room, yes. Huh. But, everybody normally sits on their hands before. They don't want to be seen bidding, so they were waiting. And in fact, the anonymous collector, who you've just bought this wonderful group of drawings from, bought the drawing in the sale.
Was the drawing shown publicly?
Yes.
At the sale it was, certainly. But after the sale, was it immediately into exhibitions? And has it been an exhibition history that's prominent? It
went to, because before it was going to be auctioned, I was trying to get somewhere in Florence to exhibit it. But that fell through because whatever, I can't remember why it fell through, but anyway, it fell through. And I don't think it did go on any travelling exhibition anywhere. No, I don't think it didn't go to Japan, didn't come here. Yeah. So I think it just stayed in London for people to see.
So the only time that it's been shown publicly, you think, is in the recent Met exhibition of Michelangelo
and
drawings?
The Vienna one. About 2 years ago now, there was a Vienna exhibition.
Well, it's fantastic that you found this drawing. It's fantastic that it's here in the Getty and that you came to talk about the drawing. So we thank you for all of that, and thank you for this time of the podcast this morning.
Well, it's been a pleasure.
Our theme music comes from the Dharma at Big Sur, composed by John Adams for the opening of the Walt Disney Concert Hall in Los Angeles in 2003. It is licensed with permission from Hendon Music. Look for new episodes of Art and Ideas every other Wednesday. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Google Play Music. For photos, transcripts, and other resources, visit getty.edu/podcasts. Thanks for listening.